The Vanderbilt.
Vanderbilt.
The Vanderbilt.
Vanderbilt.
The Vanderbilt.
Vanderbilts.
Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt.
Vanderbilt. It's a surname that needs no introduction. It's a family that once had more money than the US Treasury did. However, the same family also had the biggest downfall in the history of the United States. The story of the Vanderbilts' legendary rise is one of the most intriguing tales in American history. But it's also loaded with the dark realities of a failed family, poor wealth management, and a disastrous fall. This is the unbelievably true story of how one of America's richest families lost it all. The Vanderbilts were originally descendants of Dutch immigrants who settled in America in the 17th century. Let's start with the man who is the reason you're watching this video right now, Cornelius Vanderbilt. Cornelius was born to two small farmers on May 27, 1794, in Staten Island, New York. His parents were not exactly wealthy, but his father had a side hustle. He ferried people and goods between Manhattan and Staten Island. As a kid, Cornelius would give his father a hand in the ferry business. In school, it was just a bump in the road between the young boy and his dreams. By the time he turned 11, he called it quits at school and joined his father full-time. But here is when it gets interesting. In 1810, when he was just 16 years old, Cornelius took a big leap. With a head full of dreams and sky-high ambitions, young Cornelius borrowed some cash from home and decided to do his own business. His plan was simple. Just like his dad, he started moving goods and passengers on ferry boats. Only this time, he did everything on his own. But what he did next was no simple feat. In just 1 year, Cornelius managed to make his first $1,000 with his tiny venture. That might not seem like a lot of money now, but back then that was nothing short of a fortune. And yet that $1,000 was just a teaser of what he would achieve in the coming years. In 1812, when war broke out between the United States and Britain, Cornelius jumped on the opportunity. By the end of the war, he wasn't just better at ferrying. He had learned how to build ships and how to handle the open waters like a master. What's more, he had also racked up around $10,000 by supplying goods and people during the war. And the best part? He knew exactly what to do with the money. By 1817, Cornelius Vanderbilt had made up his mind to bid farewell to his ferry business. He had money, shipping skills, and a burning desire to do something bigger. And most importantly, he also had a plan: steamships. He started by working with a wealthy steamship owner named Thomas Gibbons. The two worked together until Gibbons passed away in 1826. After that, Vanderbilt started his own steamship business called the Dispatch Line. As the years rolled by, his fleet kept getting bigger. And somewhere along the way, people started calling him Commodore. It wasn't long before he became one of the biggest names in the shipping game. And guess what? He was a legend in this game. He killed competition wherever he went by offering great service at dirt cheap prices. His competitors would be forced to pay him, and he would go somewhere else and repeat the same stunt. This cunning strategy worked like a charm every time. And just like that, Vanderbilt was eventually a millionaire. By the 1840s, he had stacked up enough wealth to build a huge family home in Greenwich Village, with his fortune only increasing day by day. But here is a catch. Respect didn't come as easily as money. At least, not for Vanderbilt. Even with his enormous wealth, Vanderbilt didn't fit into the typical high-class cultural standards of 19th century America. His language was quite colorful, his grammar terrible, and his handwriting far from decent. However, if there was anything Vanderbilt couldn't care less about, it was people's opinions and lavish show of wealth. For this reason, in 1851, Vanderbilt kicked off another venture, the Accessory Transit Company. But this wasn't just another shipping business. This time, he had a bigger plan: shipping passengers from New York to California. At the time, there were no railroads connecting the two states, so the only option was to travel by water. The existing route went through Panama, but Vanderbilt used his genius and found a better alternative. He came up with a much shorter route from New York to California via Nicaragua. His timing couldn't have been better. It was precisely when the California gold rush was heating up. Everyone wanted to reach California to strike gold, and Vanderbilt offered the quickest route to get there. The result? His new business took off like a rocket, pulling in over $1 million in just 1 year. By this time, he was already nearing 60. But age didn't seem to slow him down. In fact, he had yet to start the second half of his legendary career. The part of his life that was filled with controversies and conflicts. And that didn't begin until he was over 70 years old. The new shipping business ran smoothly for years and years on end, and money kept rolling in. Before he knew it, he was already 70 with a staggering fortune of over $30 million. That's when he thought of a new idea. He stepped away from the shipping game and turned his full attention to railroads. Once again, his plan was pretty simple. He wanted to buy railroads to profit from the trains running over them. He purchased the New York and Harlem line first, and then went for the Hudson line. Pretty soon, he became a big name in the railroad business. Thanks to his cunning tactics, he also took control of the New York Central Railroad. No matter what it takes, everything seemed to be going his way. Vanderbilt became the most powerful man in the American railroad industry.
His line, the New York Central, was not only the most powerful railroad in this country, it was the largest railroad in the world. And he was the most powerful railroad man in the world, probably, and certainly the richest.
But things were about to change. Vanderbilt landed himself in one of the most infamous financial battles of the time, the Erie Railroad War. Vanderbilt had his eyes set on expanding his railroad network, and his next target was the Erie Railroad. However, getting the Erie was no easy game, as the owners were in no mood to sell it. But of course, Vanderbilt, being Vanderbilt, was not the type to back down. He teamed up with the railroad's treasurer, Daniel Drew, and started buying bulks of the Erie's shares. His plan was to buy most of the Erie shares to take control. Unfortunately, things didn't go as planned. Behind his back, Drew conspired with the Erie's financiers, Jay Gould and James Fisk, and began issuing additional shares of the Erie stock. Vanderbilt continued buying the watered-down shares, hoping his rivals would soon run out of patience and money, except that never happened. The trio stood firm on their shady practices. They kept issuing fake shares that Vanderbilt continued to buy at inflated prices. The incident was soon all over the news, with newspapers covering it like a real war. Eventually, the court stepped in to put an end to the chaos. In the end, Vanderbilt had to sell off the shares at much lower prices and let go of his dream to get the Erie. This was probably the biggest setback of his business. And to make things worse, his wife Sophie also passed away around this time, in 1868. These events took a heavy toll on Vanderbilt. Fortunately, his children knew better and helped their father overcome his challenges. He got married again, this time to a distant cousin named Frank Armstrong, who was over 30 years younger than him. In his final years, Vanderbilt shifted his focus back to his railroad empire. At the time of his death in 1877, Cornelius Vanderbilt was worth over a whopping $100 million. The amount was so huge that even the US Treasury couldn't surpass it at the time. If that doesn't seem a lot to you, that's worth almost $300 billion in today's money, way more than Elon Musk's net worth. Most of that wealth went to Vanderbilt's eldest son, William Henry Vanderbilt. William inherited $90 million, while William's 4 sons together received $7.5 million. With this big inheritance, one question loomed large with his death. Could William even come close to his father's legacy? And thus began the next era of the Vanderbilt family. Any fool can make a fortune. It takes a man of brains to hold on to it. That's what Commodore Cornelius Vanderbilt once told his son, William. Vanderbilt wanted to leave his wealth in the hands of just one person, which is why he left almost everything to William. As for William, he tried his best. As soon as he took charge of the railroad business, he began ramping it up. The business started reaching new heights. Growth doubled, and so did the Vanderbilts' wealth. However, the good times didn't last very long. William passed away in 1885. He had managed to double his family wealth in just 8 years after his father's death. But the big question was, could his sons do the same? Or even just manage to hold on to what they'd been given? Turns out that the answer was a disappointing no. Unlike his father, William did not hand over all his wealth to just one son. Instead, he split his stake in the New York Central between 2 of his 4 sons, Cornelius Vanderbilt II and William Kissam Vanderbilt. For a while, the 2 brothers kept the railroad business up and thriving after their father's death. But there was one thing no one saw coming. The golden age of the Vanderbilts was coming to an end. Cornelius II continued to manage the railroads as long as he lived. But when he died in 1899, his brother William Kissam didn't seem all that interested in the family business. He tried to follow suit, but he soon left the company for his horses and yachts. His exit from the company was the unofficial end of Vanderbilt's growing wealth. Most of the next members of the family were excellent spenders and horrible earners. Take George Washington Vanderbilt. He was the youngest son of William Henry. He blew away almost all his inherited fortune on building the Biltmore estate in Asheville, North Carolina. It was just one example of the family's over-the-top spending. However, it was not the only display of extravagance by the Vanderbilts. The Vanderbilts spent their money like crazy, building mansions after mansions on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. Unfortunately, most of these mansions are no longer Vanderbilt property now, but it didn't stop there. They also built spacious summer cottages in Rhode Island. No matter how much they spent, it never seemed enough. However, as the saying goes, all good things must come to an end, and the Vanderbilts' good times were no exception. After all, the money was limited. Plus, the railroad business had started drying up. New transport options had started to appear in the picture. Think about buses, trucks, and airplanes. Trains were not the only option anymore. And by the end of the Second World War, things had completely shifted. The family had to sell off chunks of their New York Central shares to other companies. Finally, in 1954, the last Vanderbilt to serve the railroad was also out of the game, and that was the official end of the Vanderbilts' railroad legacy. But what happened to all those massive mansions they built? What about the Vanderbilts who were left, and where are they now? By the time they reached the fourth generation, the legacy of the Commodore was entirely lost. The modern Vanderbilts loved the lavish display of wealth just as much the Commodore hated them. In fact, Cornelius II's son, Reggie Vanderbilt, was a well-known playboy and gambler. He was also the father of Gloria Vanderbilt, who went on to become a popular fashion designer. Besides her designing skills, she was also popular for her affairs with people like Frank Sinatra, Roald Dahl, and Marlon Brando. Anyway, one of the very last notable names in the Vanderbilt family is probably Gloria's son, Anderson Cooper. You might have seen him on CNN anchoring news broadcasts, or on CBS News where he appears on the 60 Minutes show. Cooper has made a career for himself aside from his family's wealth. Not that much of the wealth remains, though. Remember all those luxurious mansions that once lined up Fifth Avenue? Almost all of them were demolished, and the only one that remains is now a Versace store. The summer cottages in Rhode Island met a similar fate. The Breakers and the Marble House have literally become museums. Fortunately, the Biltmore estate is still managed by George Vanderbilt's great-grandchildren. However, besides these few things, there is nothing much to say about the Vanderbilts of today. The Vanderbilt family is one of America's most talked-about families ever. They built their fortune on sheer hard work and unparalleled willpower, but lost it all quickly because of sheer carelessness and overspending. If there is anything to learn from this story, it's probably what the Commodore told his son, that any fool can make a fortune. It takes a man of brains to hold on to it. Or perhaps it's just a curse for all enormously wealthy families to lose their wealth after a few generations. What do you think? Where did the Vanderbilts get it wrong? Could they have done anything different to maintain their wealth? Tell us in the comments. Thank you for watching. Check out our other videos for more captivating stories that will make you think differently about the world around you. See you in the next one.